morning. My name is Diana, and I'm going to be filming a video series about my family history of breast cancer, my personal journey with BRCA1, and having a preventative double mastectomy. So I wanted to create a series because I felt that when I was going through all of the research, there just wasn't a lot of information pertinent to me and my situation, and it really would have been helpful to just have another voice that was a little bit closer to mine. So I'm going to break this up into different sections. The first section that I'll start with is going to be my family history and then the lead up to having the surgery. So we'll just get right into that. So I am 36 years old. I have never been diagnosed with cancer myself. I'm relatively healthy, no ailments or diagnoses or anything like that. I don't take any medications. So pretty good candidate for surgery. However, my family history is a bit of a different story. So in 2005, my mother was diagnosed at the age of 44 with breast cancer. She did end up having a mastectomy on just her affected side and then followed up with extensive chemotherapy and radiation. She has not had cancer come back, thankfully. So that was kind of my first introduction to having a family member with breast cancer. And then secondarily, my grandfather was diagnosed in 2012. For him, they kind of did the opposite, where they went through chemotherapy first to try and shrink his tumor, and then once they realized that they had been able to do that, they then went in and surgically removed it. He did end up getting acute myeloid leukemia from his chemotherapy, which is unfortunately a known potential side effect of having chemotherapy at a later age in life. He did end up passing away from that a couple of years ago. However, because he is a man diagnosed with breast cancer, they ended up doing a genetic test for him, and I have a lot of paperwork just because I find it helpful. So he was diagnosed with the BRCA1 mutation that came back as positive for him, and he did end up getting a letter which was given to all of his descendants so that we could all also get tested if we wanted to. So he was tested July of 2013. This paperwork basically enabled me to go to my hospital system and request an appointment with a genetic counselor, which I did in 2018. We then filled out, I'm going to hold this kind of far back, but a family history, so you can kind of see all the black dots are people who have had breast cancer in my family. We then also had to go through paperwork with the genetic counselor. This is about 15 pages of family history, who's had what types of cancer, who's had what types of health ailments, heart disease, anything like that. And then it was also a very extensive personal history on my part. They then took 2 vials of blood and sent that off to the genetics lab, and I got a phone call about 2 weeks later telling me that unfortunately I was also BRCA1 positive. So the way that it worked for me is that once I got that positive diagnosis of BRCA1, they put me into sort of a prevention program, which involves a lot of doctor's appointments. So the plan was that every 3 months I would be seen in some capacity by my cancer specialist provider team. That team included the breast surgeon, so the actual breast surgeon who would do my eventual surgery, the oncology surgeon who, should I want to have reproductive surgery, such as my ovaries removed or a hysterectomy, she would take care of that piece. And then I was also expected to have yearly MRIs and 3D mammograms. So the plan was that every 3 months I would have an appointment in some capacity, and it would go usually an in-clinic appointment with one of my surgeons, then an MRI, then an in-clinic appointment, and then a mammogram. So every 3 months there would be some kind of check-up The reason for me that they wanted to get on that path so quickly is that I was approximately 10 years younger than my mother was when she was diagnosed with cancer, and they try to start the preventative measures about 10 years before anyone else has been diagnosed, just because prevention is a great thing, but if you're going to develop cancer, catching it early is really your best chance. So I did go through that 3-month plan for about a year and a half, and it just got to be really stressful. Over time, you kind of start to realize that when you have a predisposition to cancer, there's not an expectation of if you're going to get cancer anymore. The medical community starts drilling into your head that it's a question of when. So when will the mammogram come back with something that they need to investigate? When will they find something that they actually have to do something about? And if you've ever had a mammogram or an MRI, you may already know that they come back with false positives. So should I have developed a cyst in my breast tissue, they would have had to investigate it. And the likelihood of eventually having something come up was very high for me. And I just, over time, couldn't really handle the constant stress of every 3 months being put in a situation of, is this going to be the month that they're going to tell me, you've developed cancer, we really need to move on this. So I made the decision in October of 2019 to have a preventative double mastectomy. The main reason behind that was because when my mother was diagnosed, she was 44, and she had a very aggressive cancer. She had a very aggressive treatment, and she's now 60 years old and not living her best life because of the after effects of her cancer, the reconstructive surgery, and the chemotherapy and radiation. So of all the things I learned about my mother going through cancer, the biggest thing that I learned was that I do not want to go through that. So it seemed like when I stacked up all of my statistics and all of the data that the doctors went through with me, I really started to feel like I couldn't justify not listening to it and not really seeing that I was given the opportunity to basically hold my health history in future in my hand now and make a decision that could change the course of that. So it's almost like getting a BRCA1 positive diagnosis without actually having cancer is like a crystal ball. You are kind of given the opportunity to change the course of your health. And scary, incredibly scary. A lot of stress involved in making the decision, but I really weighed my options. And when I went in for one of my 3-month exams with my oncology surgeon, I think I kind of freaked her out. I freaked my husband out because I just sort of blurted, like, let's schedule it. Let's do this. Let's do this mastectomy. Get me scheduled for 2020. I want it all in the same calendar year. We're going to do this. And making that decision on one hand was incredibly terrifying, but on the other hand was also something that I needed to do. I needed to vocalize it because I'd been sitting on this information for 2 years and I was just too scared to commit, because when you're talking surgery, there are risks. And even having a mastectomy, there's still a risk of breast cancer. They could have missed tissue. Everything is not set in stone. And the biggest fear for me personally was that, just personality-wise, for me, I'm a planner. I like to know everything that's happening. I don't want to be surprised. And unfortunately, nothing about this process was easy or predetermined or could be laid out with exact measure. Everything was kind of up in the air all the time, and because everyone reacts differently to all of these things, I didn't really know what to expect. And unfortunately, so much of the information about having a preventative mastectomy, about being BRCA1 positive, so much of it that I found on the internet was horror stories. It was negative. It was people complaining about everything that went wrong with their situation. And that really scared me, because I was, you look at photos of mastectomies and you see, the train tracks across people's breast tissue with staples and all of that. And it just looked horrible. There was also kind of this instilled fear that I feel like I got from listening to other people's stories where everything was doom and gloom. Constant pain or this or that, and not going through those types of negatives myself. I really wanted to create one more voice out there that was kind of the other side of the story. What else you could expect, what could happen. So that's kind of part one, my diagnosis of BRCA1, family history of breast cancer, healthy, 36 years old, and I made the decision after a very lengthy personal discussion with myself to have the double mastectomy. And in the subsequent parts of this series, I'm going to go through in more detail about the different steps. So this is the end of part one. If you have any questions about my process with the decision that I've made to do this, or with the process with the genetics team or anything like that, please leave a comment down below if you would like to share anything personal about your own story of having a mastectomy or BRCA1. So please leave a comment. I feel like the more voices out there, the better. So thank you for watching this, and stay tuned for part two.